Last night, during the State of the Union address, something slipped. Not from the podium, but from the frustration behind it. The U.S. trade leader made it clear Canada will only receive a deal if it accepts higher tariffs. In other words, cave, pay more, submit. And that tells you everything about where this government stands right now. Because when a superpower starts saying, you only get a deal if you surrender first, that's not confidence. That's pressure. That's desperation. But here's the part Washington did not foresee. Mark Carney is not folding. He is not panicking. He is not eager to negotiate from weakness. Instead, he's expanding. Let's be clear about what just transpired. The U.S. Trade Representative publicly stated Canada must accept higher tariffs to move forward. That's not how balanced trade negotiations work. That's leverage talk. But leverage only works if the other side needs you more than you need them. And that's where this calculation may be inaccurate. Because instead of asking for access to the U.S. market, Carney has been doing something far more strategic. He's diversifying away from it. This isn't rhetoric. This is policy. This is long-term repositioning. And it is precisely what is making Washington uneasy.
He suggested that if Canada is going to get some kind of deal with the United States, that Canada needs to be prepared to accept a higher tariff rate, and that Canada work with the United States so that jobs from outside of the United States can return to the U.S. Have a listen.
When we go to other countries and we make a deal with them, the other countries, they agree that we can have a tariff on them, that we can have a protective tariff to protect our industries as we try to reshore, and they open their markets to us. If Canada wants to agree that we can have some level of higher tariff on them while they open up their markets to us and things like dairy and other things, then that's a helpful conversation. We have very open lines of communication. We'll keep talking.
The Parperier website. Donald Trump feeds on leverage. His negotiation technique has always relied on asymmetry. Pressure the smaller party, force concessions, dominate the terms. But that technique breaks if the smaller partner builds alternatives. If Canada redirects exports, if Canada can secure markets abroad, if Canada can withstand the blow, then tariff threats become blunt instruments. And blunt implements don't intimidate disciplined leaders. That is why we're hearing tougher rhetoric from U.S. officials, not because they're winning, but because the pressure isn't working the way they planned. And who has everything to lose in a circumstance like this? Donald Trump.
And those conversations are continuing to advance. But my job as a Minister of International Trade is to look beyond North America. And so trade diversification, our goal of hitting $300 billion of non-U.S. exports, additional non-U.S. exports is very, very important. And that's why this trade that's coming up, this trade trip that's coming up is very, very important in terms of unlocking opportunities for workers.
Now this is where the subject switches from trade policy to leadership. Because look around the world. When Washington imposed tariff pressure, what happened? Some politicians scrambled to gain exemptions. Some accepted temporary tariff adjustments. Some discreetly absorbed the tariffs. Some made symbolic declarations and then went on. But Carney didn't absorb. He didn't stall. He didn't pose. He acted. And that distinction is everything. While others reacted to Trump's pressure cycle, Carney stopped the pattern totally. Instead of haggling over the tariff percent, he adjusted the equation. He refused to bargain from fear. He refused to endorse the idea that Canada must accept higher tariffs just to sit at the table. And that's why this moment is greater than Canada. Because in a world where global leaders have often recalibrated themselves around Washington's instability, Carney recalibrated Canada away from it. That is not defiance for the sake of defiance. That is structural independence. And that's what makes this so difficult for the U.S. administration. Because when pressure doesn't induce fear, when threats don't bring compromises, when a mid-sized economy doesn't blink, it sends a signal globally. It tells other nations that alignment with the U.S. is no longer the only growth option. It informs markets that Canada is willing to suffer turmoil for long-term leverage. It warns Washington that the traditional formula, escalate, intimidate, extract, may not work this time. And here's the reality. This is not noisy pushback. This is disciplined resistance. Carney didn't respond with fury. He reacted with architecture. He didn't hit back with headlines. He discreetly constructed alternatives. He didn't say, "We won't cave." He built a universe where he doesn't have to. And that is significantly more powerful. Because leadership in moments like this isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who builds the most options. And right now, Carney is building choices. While others adjusted to Washington's gravity, Canada started altering its orbit. That's why this isn't simply another tariff tale. This is a repositioning narrative. And in geopolitics, repositioning shifts leverage. Carney's forthcoming trade mission is not regular diplomacy. India represents huge consumer expansion. Japan represents high-tech industrial cooperation. Australia represents resource and security alignment. This is a triangulation tactic spanning Indo-Pacific democracies. And it sends a message. Canada's future growth will not rest on a single market, not even the United States. And that is the structural shift that shifts the balance. When a U.S. trade official says accept higher tariffs or no deal, it implies something major. They desire movement. They want concessions. They want approval of their tariff structure. But if Canada resists, if Canada expands abroad, if Canada accepts short-term pain for long-term freedom, then the entire pressure model weakens. That's the strategic chessboard right now. And it's not just Trump who is bearing the strain. Ironically, the trade battle may have boosted Canada's global positioning. It forced diversification. It advanced non-U.S. trade agreements. It deepened Indo-Pacific alignment. It reinforced EU links. It hardened negotiation posture. And in politics, adversity frequently demands clarity. Canada now realizes it must be economically adaptable. That clarity is strength.
And so those conversations will continue to happen. My job as the International Trade Minister is to focus on economic opportunities, because at a time where we need to make sure that we have economic resiliency with what's happening with our southern neighbor, we promise Canadians that we will diversify, and what we're doing is leading to results. You talk about our trip to China, unlocking $7 billion of agriculture opportunities in seafood, in beef, in canola. You talk about Prime Minister Carney's visit to the Gulf, bringing back $70 billion commitment to build major projects across Canada. Our commitment to the EU and now being put into the defense procurement opportunity. So this is what it's all about. At the end of the day, it's about workers and unlocking opportunities.
This is not a story about pride. It's not about ego. It's not about yelling matches. It's about structural realignment. The U.S. says accept greater tariffs. Carney says we'll expand elsewhere. The U.S. argues this is the only road to an agreement. Canada says we have options, and in global trade, options are strength. The fundamental question is no longer whether Canada caves. The real question is whether Washington adjusts to a Canada that is no longer dependent. Because this isn't simply a trade battle anymore. It's a shift in economic alignment. And the repercussions of that transition will define North America for the next decade. If you want analysis that goes beyond headlines and breaks down the real geopolitical chess moves influencing Canada's future, here is your channel. Subscribe to Canada Today. Switch on alerts, and stay ahead of every shift in this expanding trade conflict. And now I want to hear from you. Is Carney's diversification approach the proper long-term decision, or should Canada prioritize healing ties with Washington first? Let me know in the comments.